are live. So good morning, everyone. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. For those joining us for the first time, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And today we're doing a little bit of all three. It's a really exciting session. We're so thrilled to have you guys here as we continue to celebrate October with 60 plus sessions. So it's the biggest month we've ever done. Right now, we've got 5 classes joining us from across North America, so I want to give them a chance to say a little hello. We've got Mrs. Gallant's grade 6s in Guelph, Ontario. Hi, guys. Hey, welcome in. We've got Miss Sullivan's grade 10 through 12s in San Antonio in Texas. Hi, guys. Hi. Hey. We've got Miss Fellows grade 2s in Waterloo in Ontario. Hi, guys. Let's get your mic demuted and say hi. There we go. Hi, guys. There we are. Hey. Oh, yeah, your mic's not working. We got to take in questions, but I love the enthusiasm. All right. We've got Miss Bowles, grade 9s in Goderich, Ontario. Hey, guys. Hey, with a green screen. Very exciting. All right. And then last but not least, we've got Miss Cowgill's grade 3s in Windham in Ohio. Hi, guys. Hi. Awesome. Of course, the reason you guys are all here today is for our speaker. So we are joined live in Coxwell in the UK by Sacha Dench. She is the co-founder and CEO of Conservation Without Borders, and she's going to talk to us today about her conservation adventure, flight of the Swans, where for over 4,000 kilometers, she paramotored her way from northern Russia all the way to the UK. I'm going to turn it over to her to detail an incredible adventure. And so without further ado, thank you so much for joining us, Sacha, and take it away.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. Yes, so it's exciting to be here and telling you all the stories. So I'm going to basically tell you a story about my last expedition, which was, I don't know how much everybody knows already, but it was basically trying to fly with migrating birds all the way from Arctic Russia to the UK. Shall I start sharing my screen? Is that the idea?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Okay, right, let's try and make this work.
You can do it.
Okay. Share. Is that working?
Perfect. Yes, we've got it where your slides up in the middle and slide decks on the left, just like we had in practice.
Okay, right. And I'm sorry that there doesn't seem to be any way of making that change. So as long as you can all see what's on the screen, that's fine. So this is the swan that I followed on migration. It's a swan called the Buick Swan. It's quite similar to a swan you have in the US called the tundra swan, but these ones have got slightly more yellow on their bill. And there's another really special thing about this bird. I don't know if you can tell from this picture that in about the 1950s, so a few decades ago, a man realized that every single one of the swans has a slightly different pattern of yellow on its bill, and that he could identify all of them by their individual patches of yellow. And if we go back to this slide, you can see that they're quite similar, but there's a little bit of difference in every one. So he became an expert, and in the last few decades, we've named about 10,000 of these birds. So whatever your names are, there's probably a bird that has the same name as you. And so if we stick back in the kind of 60s, for people sitting in England, they would see the swans arrive on migration in around sort of September, October time. And then they would leave in around March, heading generally across towards the east and towards Europe. But they didn't actually know exactly where they went. Is it possible to get answers at the moment, or is everybody muted?
No, everyone's muted, but I can unmute them. If you want to ask a question, I can pull up a specific class and ask them.
I would like to ask a question. So basically, this man on the right is called Peter Scott. I don't know if you know of Scott of the Antarctic, Captain Scott of the Antarctic. Peter Scott was his son. And he was quite innovative and really interested in conservation. Anyway, this was before the days of GPS tags, and he wanted to know where the swans go every year. So he had an interesting idea of trying to track them. And you might have a hint from the picture on the left. Can anyone see anything unusual about the swans in the picture on the left?
Let's see, Miss Cowgill's class. You guys see anything odd in Ohio?
Can you say that louder?
Some of them are white and some of them are brown.
Some of them, okay, we got white birds and brown birds, yeah.
Some of them have yellow on them.
Some of them have yellow on them, yes.
On their tails.
Okay.
On their tails, yes. We actually call them yellow bums. But yeah, so that was his unusual idea. He realized that if he caught some of the swans and dyed their bottoms yellow, then sent them off on migration again, then he figured that other people in other countries around the world that loved swans would see swans that had been dyed yellow, and they would get angry enough that they would start writing letters, and they would eventually find their way back to him. So that is what he did, and he slowly pieced together all of those letters. He managed to map their general migration route, which is something like that. So we had letters from all these different places, all the way from the Russian Arctic, which is at the far right where it says start, all the way across Europe. And these big yellow dots are the big wetland sites along the way where the birds stop and rest and feed on their long migration back to the UK. And here is a picture of this is the picture of the Buick Swan up on its Arctic breeding grounds. They migrate up there every year to breed. Can any of you, just looking at this picture, if you have a bit of an idea of what the landscape is like in that area, has anyone got any ideas of why the swans might like the Russian Arctic? Why would they go up there to breed every year?
Let's go to Miss Ball's class. What do you guys think? Why are they going to the Arctic? Oh, hear you guys? No, you're muted again. Okay. Let's go to Miss.
Sorry, Joe, we're here.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. So why would they go up to the Arctic every year, guys? There, but
Can you repeat the question?
yeah. So Sacha asked, why do you think the geese are going up to the Arctic every year? Why would they end up there?
Why are they going up to the Arctic every year, guys? We're not sure. To nest?
Okay. To nest?
Yeah.
So Sacha, yeah.
Yeah, I can tell you. So basically there's a few reasons. One of them is because it freezes over every year in winter and then it defrosts. It means that the new shoots and plants are growing. So as soon as it starts to get warm again, there's lots of new shoots, which are perfect. New shoots of grass and things and berries, which are perfect for young birds. Also, there's no trees up there. And obviously, if you're a big swan, obstacles are not great. So you want to be able to land and take off freely. And you have all of that up in the Arctic. And there's also not that many predators. There are some, but that's just some of the reasons why the birds are going up there. So anyway, why did I decide to migrate with the birds? Here is just a quick example. Some people have joked that it looks like the swans were shrinking, but actually that's just a diagram to say that we had lost about half of them in the previous sort of 20 years. They were every year on migration. We would get less and less coming back. So some years, 1 in every 4 birds doesn't survive a return migration. And so the scientists in all the countries along the flyway were really concerned about this. And we knew some of the reasons. Are you all okay for me to talk about some of the really negative sides of being a swan?
Go for it.
Yeah, okay. So one of them is we would catch an X-ray birds and maybe 1 in every 3 birds has got pieces of lead shot in them where they've been shot at while they're flying. And so that was obviously something that was a problem. Also, some of them they like to eat small stones and things to help them with digestion, and some of them were eating the lead pellets. So that is one of the problems for them that we knew of. Also, sorry, this is quite a bad picture, so I'll move on. Quite a lot of the birds hit power lines, and when you know that birds are hitting power lines, then you can do stuff to the power lines to try and stop that. But unless we knew what was going on in all the different places, or we had people who would say when they saw birds hitting power lines, and you couldn't do anything about it. So one of the problems was that we needed to go to some of the remote areas, some areas where there weren't very many people. And also, this is a shot of a wetland, and we like to talk about the wetlands on the flyways being a bit like, well, in England we call them service stations, so the places you stop for fuel on a long journey with your family. if you're a swan child with a signal flying with the swans, what you're stopping at along the way is these big wetlands as a service stations. That's where they can be safe, away from foxes and things, and they eat the small shoots and plants that are in the water there. So we also know that some of the wetlands were disappearing, and maybe there was pollution, maybe there was other things. But again, if we didn't know, if we weren't going to these places regularly, and the swans fly across some of the remotest parts of the world, then we just didn't know. So we needed to find a way of going with the swans and figuring out what was going on. And perhaps if the wetlands weren't so good anymore, it might be that the swans just didn't have enough energy for making the long migration. And so this is a chart that we created. Does anybody want to comment on what's different about all of these different swans, these different swan diagrams?
We'll go to Miss Fellows' class. What do you guys think is different? Oh yeah, your mute mic's not on. Jeez. We'll go to Miss Gallant's class. You guys have a thought on what's different about the swans? Any thoughts? No? Oh, now your mic's not working. All the tech's failing today. Sasha, I think.
Oh no, okay, stop asking questions. Is that what you're gonna say? Okay. Okay, so the difference, basically all these different swans have slightly different sizes of, well, the area around their bottom again. So it's called the abdomen, but you might see in the very first one, number one is a very skinny swan. It's basically got an empty fuel tank around its bottom. Swan number 6 has got a lot of fuel. So it's basically been able to eat a lot. So we are able to kind of judge how healthy, how much the food the bird is being able to find by the size of their bottom. So basically, in summary, we had this problem where quite a lot of the birds were disappearing on every migration. There were some very remote areas the birds fly across, and their journey is thousands of kilometers, somewhere, depending on the route they take, between about 4,000 kilometers and maybe 6,000 kilometers. So yeah, that was the main problem. And I kept looking at it. So here's a Google Map version of that route. So the little red lines were the routes. So we had an idea of where the birds were flying every year. That red dot is a swan called Hope that we put a little GPS collar on, and a little collar on with a little solar panel. And that solar panel allows the tag to tell us, or would tell me through my mobile phone, where the bird is at any point, and it talks through the mobile phone network. So anytime that bird goes within a few kilometers of a mobile phone tower, then its exact route is sent to us. So basically, all the scientists had this problem of needing to find out more about what was going on along the flyway and how are we going to do it. And so I had this crazy idea that I would fly with the birds in a paramotor. Now, I don't know how many of you see paramotors or have seen them regularly, but it is basically hanging from a big piece of fabric from lots of spine lines in a chair with a propeller on your back. And that doesn't look like something that was built to fly from Russia to the UK. I can see that. It looks not like something you'd want to do really long journeys in. However, if you want to try and get scientists and people inside the head of a swan, it actually turned out to be a perfect thing, because you fly at about the same speed as the swans, about the same altitude, and you can take off and land anywhere. You don't need runways, a bit like the swan. Obviously, I avoid landing on water. And the other thing is, anytime you land in an aircraft like this, when you stop, people are interested and they want to come and talk to you. And as I wanted to talk to lots of people about where they saw swans, what might be the problem, did they know where swans were dying, then it turned out to be a perfect aircraft. So I can stop, talk to people, and then when I'm finished, I can just put the propeller on my back again and take off again. And so, yeah, that was the main reason behind the trip, to go to some really remote areas. This is the very start of my expedition. It's a big wetland. You can probably see on the top right-hand side, it's a big delta. So that is the area where a lot of the birds who are breeding all around this area, they'll gather there in big groups before they leave on migration to the west. And on the left, there's a small picture of a man that says, "Hello from the Russian Arctic." And so I had a really big problem up on this coast, because there are no roads. You can probably see that there's no straight lines or anything. And I had a problem of how was I going to get fuel for my propeller for the first 1,000 kilometers. And most of the small towns up along the coast are abandoned. And you probably can't see that there's little pencil marks that this man made where he dropped me fuel during the winter when he could get there in an ATV. He dropped me some drops of fuel up there. So yeah, this man ended up being very, very helpful. He's also chairman of the Nenets reindeer breeders. So he grew up in the Arctic, and he basically knew more or less where the nomadic communities would be when I was flying, so that if I needed help, even though there's no major towns there, I could find these people. He also left me with a Nenets camp. You can see on the right, there's the part of one of their tents, which they call a chum, which is one big tent that everybody sleeps in. And in the background, there's some of the sleds. And up in the Arctic, where there's no trees, you can see they carry with them a lot of wood, because they use wood for fire. They use it for all sorts of things. So wood for them is very valuable. And any time they find rundown buildings or driftwood on the coast, they'll take it with them. So yeah, at this point, I had this crazy idea to fly with the swans and to try and find out what I could, following their GPS tags and visiting all the sites. But there were various things that I had to do for people to let me actually do it. One of them was I had to show that I could survive some pretty extreme weather conditions. So I'll try and play this video, but it might not work, because it didn't work in the test. Can you just tell me, Joe, if this is working?
Yeah, will do. So
can you hear wind noise?
No, I don't hear wind noise, but we can see it.
Oh, you can see it. Okay. Well, let's start. Okay. But you can hear me.
Yep.
Yeah. So basically, that was a test. So that's actually intentional. This is it from a different angle from my lap. This was me. I had to show that I could handle myself if the wind got really bad and my whole wing collapsed. So this is practicing making the whole wing collapse and then putting up with it for a while, and then making sure when it starts to fly again that I could control it and get it under control so I would be safe again. So you can see it's quite a violent thing to do, and I used to be scared of turbulence. So this was a bit of a challenge, but very useful nonetheless. So yeah, the main thing was to prove to myself that if everything went bad, that I would keep cool and find solutions for getting myself out of a problem. And yeah, I probably won't show this video, but this is the kind of landscape I was flying over. So you can see that there's plenty of wetlands, so these big pools all over the place. And the small white patches on the ground are the pale patches are either sand or they're lichen. And that was the one thing up there, that the colors of the ground changed all the time. But when there's no trees or anything, it's quite hard to know the scale of anything, how big the patches for landing and things are. So basically, I was constantly on the lookout for patches of white. There's an airplane wing in this shot. This was not taken by me, needless to say. This was taken on a trip earlier when they were trying to explain how to fly. And then I'll just show you another brief one. I'll show you another brief video. Let's just see if this works. I also basically had to show that I would be comfortable if I landed in the water, which could happen because there was lots of water I was flying over. Would I be able to sort myself out? You've got lots of metal and things around you. I needed to be able to get out of that and also have a wing with me. So I'll try and show you that video again. Let me know, Joe, if you can hear the audio or not.
Any lessons learned in the safety of this pool saves his life.
What's that?
She has to prepare for the worst. Sacha's been training for months, including flying in Arctic conditions, before she attempts something that's never been done before, following Buick Swans on their 7,000-kilometer migratory flight from northern Russia to the UK. She'll fly a paramotor, essentially a large parachute-style canopy with a propeller on her back. The objective is to find out why their numbers are under threat, but to do that, Sacha needs to try and eliminate the risks to her life.
The impact is always a bit of a shock.
and the North Sea might be a bit colder than this. It's interesting to try different scenarios. So, for example, if the impact was hard, if the waves had been big, we just practiced what would happen if I was, for example, paralysed, couldn't use my legs, could I still right myself? Just use the movement, the buoyancy, and yeah, that also worked quite well.
So yeah, so I basically had to do a whole series of tests to just see what it was like, basically, for me to be able to do all the things that a swan can do. And this is in a cold chamber. So when a swan is doing this migration, they're flapping hard all the time. So they are keeping themselves warm by creating body heat, and you don't do that in a paramotor. So I had to wear different layers of clothing and practice being in minus 25 degrees and see that I would be happy like that and still be able to function properly. And so, yeah, basically with that, I did a whole series of tests in order to just to be able to start to try and be a swan, and had some very famous people coming to help me. They're very famous in the UK. Does anybody, are these all well-known figures for anyone who's listening from the US?
Maybe.
Maybe.
I don't know.
So it's David Amber on the left, wildlife documentary maker, Ranulph Fiennes, who's an explorer in the middle, and Judi Dench on the left, who plays M in James Bond. And she came on board to help because I needed lots of permissions from different people, and the Russians really love James Bond, and so she definitely helped me get permissions, because I was asking to fly in some very remote areas where they wouldn't normally let people, certainly a girl with a paramotor, go and fly. But basically, I was eventually given permission to fly. And bearing in mind, you saw what the swans looked like earlier, and some of the baby swans do this journey their first time when they're only maybe 12 weeks old, so they're pretty young, they've just learned to fly. This is what I basically had to try and take with me if I was trying to be a swan and survive the journey. So there's all sorts for communication, for staying warm, for letting people know if something went wrong, batteries I needed to keep my GPS loaded, all of these things that a swan can do automatically. And I will whiz through these. So basically this is, I wasn't trying to fly next to a particular swan, but we had a series of swans. You can see in this picture more clearly that they all have quite different patterns on their face, on their bill, and they each have names, Marlena 2, Daisy Clark, Charlotte. And so the idea was that when the first bird with a GPS collar left on migration, I would follow them. And the first one was Daisy Clark at the bottom left. She left as soon as the first cold winds came from the northeast. And basically, when the swans do this journey, they're constantly, they're moving because they have to, because once the cold winds come, the Arctic freezes over very quickly. So we basically, I had to leave. As soon as the first bird left, I had to follow them. And this is just a shot to show that each of these different signs are different, the directions that different birds are leaving on migration. So the Russian Arctic is really important for lots of migrating birds. And that was Daisy Clark. And this is me flying over some of the wetlands. You can see that the landscape is quite unusual, and very, very little people up there. And it changes to all sorts of different bright colors. And I basically had to keep going down to ground level to check whether it was tarred ground or it was just plants on the top of water, because it could be quite dangerous if I tried to land in the wrong kind of stuff. And I was also looking out a lot of the time for these guys. One of the things we're looking for was predators. Were there more or less predators? And polar bears are one of the predators up there. They're coming more and more on land these days. And this was a regular sight in the air, big flocks of swans flying in V formation. Quite often I actually saw there were swans and geese flying together. So the swans are protected up in this part of the world, in fact, on their whole route. But some of the geese aren't protected. So we figured that's one of the reasons they might be being shot by hunters, is that the hunters aren't distinguishing them once they're flying in groups together. Here we go. And here's more of the kind of landscapes. There were some really big beaches. There's a tiny picture of, I'm in the bottom right of this photograph. So the landscapes are all really huge up here, and there were beluga whales migrating off the right-hand side of the coast. It was hard not to get distracted by them. And these are some of the people up in the north. They migrate, they follow the reindeer. They have reindeer for pets, and reindeer is also their main source of food. And you can probably see from these surroundings that it's mostly permafrost, so they don't have agriculture. So they have to rely on things that grow like mushrooms or berries that grow naturally, or or on reindeer and birds and fish. So it's really, really interesting to try and work with them. Raw reindeer meat, this is a kind of a delicacy I was given. I'm not sure I would choose to have it. Certainly as they don't have fridges, it was quite smelly. Yeah, this is more shots of the kind of people I was meeting on the migration. So basically the whole point was to stop and talk to people and try and find out from them all and get everybody trying to help us save the swans. And just to give you a very brief picture, although the pictures so far have been of me flying, once I'd got over the Arctic and the big stretch of tundra where there's no roads, there was a ground crew to meet me. And this looks like a huge ground crew, but it is because we were making a film at the same time. We had a lot of events that we had to go to, and the media were starting to get really interested. So we had a film crew with us. And on the far right-hand side of this shot, you can see a trike, which is part of another microlight. And that was used to be able to take important people up when we basically wanted to go to an area and show them how important the wetlands were, because they needed to be where we thought they needed to be protected. There was one thing to just tell people, it's another thing to take people up in a microlight and show them what their wetland is and how it's connected with the landscape and how important it is to people and to wildlife. So it's basically, yeah, with me sometimes on my own, sometimes with the ground crew somewhere down below. I carried on the journey. And there were a few times when the birds told us something really interesting. So, for example, this swan at one point decided to reverse his migration and he headed back up north. And we didn't know why. And from a satellite map, it's very hard to tell. So I took a flight out over this delta. And this was a site we didn't think was important or didn't used to be important. And actually, I managed to go out there and count about 2,000 swans. And because I was there, I could also look down and see what they were doing. So they were basically eating. There's plenty of water plants there now. But this is a site we didn't think they used on this migration. And we think in the past that actually, because the climate is changing and it's now warmer, that it's actually, it means that it's no longer frozen anymore. So it's a site that the birds can now use. And then, so that was basically a whole new site for us, and potentially another site where there could be problems we didn't know about. So we've made a connection with the local people there and now have a project trying to look out for swans. And then that big landscape of wetlands and no trees turns into the taiga, which is all trees and not very many places to land, as you can probably tell. And the other slightly scary thing about flying over all these trees with only the narrow road to land on was that the trees kind of breathe humidity. And so suddenly this land of broad trees can pretty quickly turn into something a bit more like this. So I had to constantly be on the lookout for it, because once you are above the clouds, it is pretty scary trying to figure out how to find your way back down again. So I would avoid that at all costs. And again, all along the way, I was stopping and talking to kids, which was excellent. And then we were also looking at areas where the swans were having challenges. And on one particular day, I had a bit of an accident trying to take off, and I snapped the ligaments in my right knee. And so I had a group of local Russians and my ground crew. I don't know if you can see clearly from this shot that they found wheels and a frame so that they could tie my paramotor to some wheels so I could try and learn to take off from that. I'm going to try and show you this video. It is filmed using a 360 camera, so it might look a tiny bit warped. But Joe, again, can you tell me if you can see picture and sound here?
Yep. Yeah, perfect.
So it's all looking great. It's all looking perfect. And not so perfect. So this happened a few times. And this was me all trying to learn to fly. And on this occasion, it wasn't actually my fault. The 360 camera was very heavy on the end of a long stick. And so as soon as I got lifted off the ground, it toppled the paramotor over. But it took us a couple of attempts to figure that out. But eventually, because my knee wasn't really working anymore, I couldn't run with the paramotor on my back. Using these wheels was how I managed to make it all the way back. Being tracked online, there was a picture of me. I'm the blue line. There's an area where I go way off track because there's a Russian military base there. They wouldn't let me fly over, so I had to take a different route. And yeah, talking to lots of school kids all along the way as well. And so this is more of the kind of landscapes as we headed across Europe. You can see you might be able to see anyway, there's a big group of swans there on the right. Wherever there were swans, I was stopping to see what was going on, how close were people, were there threats, etc. This was a swan called Charlotte that we lost along the way. And you can see there.
Sorry to interrupt really briefly. We're at 35 minutes in, so just I know it's fantastic. I just want to make sure we have time for questions in that last 10 minutes.
Okay, right. I'm just going to then flick through some of the different landscapes, and I can pretty much, yeah. I mean, let's go. I'll just show you a couple more of the landscape shots. Go back to the UK, and then we can have Q&A.
Marvelous.
So yes, the winter did eventually catch up with me and with the swan. So you can see it's got snowier here. And yeah, I carried on meeting different people. We don't need to see that one. The landscapes changed again. There was areas where there's lots of elk. You have a lot more of those. They're much rarer in the UK. And then from the air, you can notice the landscape changed quite a lot. So from the wild wetlands of Russia, as you head towards or into Europe and into the UK, there's a lot more wind farms. And so we were also interested in that, wind farms and birds. And the change in landscape. So you can see how there's much less in the way of wetlands these days as we headed across. And people kept turning up. They put on events. People painted their faces like swans. There was lots of celebration, lots of media interest. I ended up on television with various different celebrities, but it was great that people were talking about swans. And for me, you may not recognize, this is the White Cliffs of Dover, which is a famous sort of symbol of England. And my kind of arrival back home. So yeah, basically that was a really quick summary of the journey. And here's a quick picture of my team. Made it all the way back, and yeah, now have a much better picture of the swan story, the threats, where they are. And because we were getting so much time on television and radio, I think we had about 1,000 pieces on television. All along the journey in the different countries, we've now got a lot more people helping us to try and save the swans. So at that, I will stop speaking, Joe, I'm sorry, and let's go to questions.
All good. Thank you so much. That was a fantastic adventure. Just with some of the tech difficulties, went a little long, but that's totally fine. So guys, let's dive in. We're going to start with Miss Gallant's class. If you guys have a question, want to come up and kick us off, your mic should work. We had some mic issues in the Q&A thing in the middle, but come on up, guys, and check it out. Let's see if we can get you guys with a question.
When did you start?
Sorry?
When did you start?
When did you start? Yeah. So how long did the journey take, Sacha? And when did you start?
So the whole journey took me 3 months. I started on, I think it was around September 17th. In 2016, and yeah, it took 3 months from then.
Marvelous. All right.
Joe, do you want me to go back to my
we can have
video
back,
of me?
Yeah, let's exit screen sharing, and we'll have you up and then answer from there. Perfect.
Okay, right.
All right. Miss Sullivan's group, if you guys have a question, come on up.
Yes, we do. Hello.
Hey.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're perfect.
Okay, cool. My name's Sally. I'm Isabel. Our first question is, how
And what is with the audio today? So I heard the first bit. I heard what your names were, but then we didn't get the question.
Oh no. Okay, how did you prepare yourself for the test you had to go through? Like,
Yeah, how did you prepare yourself for the test you had to go through the flight, Sacha? They were pretty intense tests. What was going on?
Oh, you mean the collapsing the wing?
Yeah, that's so.
Yeah.
How did I prepare myself for it? So what I didn't tell you earlier was that I started paragliding only because I had developed a fear of turbulence on planes. And so I was really, really terrified about this particular exercise. So I prepared for doing it by watching a lot of tests, watching a lot of other people doing it. And then I'd also practiced a lot when I was doing ordinary flying, reaching for my reserve parachute. So you have a reserve that's down by your right bum cheek.
Yeah.
And so I had practiced that, so it was automatic. So no matter what happened, I knew that I could reach for that and throw that. So that was the main things. And I tell you, there was one interesting thing I found during that test. So I had to do that again and again and again to show that I could do it. And I found it was much easier in the morning. It seems like in the morning, you over the day, you lose some of your resolve, some of your like inner strength. And after lunchtime, it was always like, oh, I'd really rather not go and do that. So yeah, but I'm very, very glad I did it because it meant that I was much stronger on the trip.
Yeah, very cool. I don't know how many of the classes saw some of your bio ahead of time that you were afraid of turbulence, but that is quite the shift to go from that on a plane to flinging yourself out of the sky.
But that is because, so I have quite a scientific brain, and I had realized that actually the fear was somewhere else. It wasn't like in my analytical bit of the brain. So I figured that, yeah, I had to do something to try and rationalize my way out of it. And I figured the best thing was to understand air, and the best way of doing that is in a paraglider, because every time the air moves, you feel it, and you feel exactly where it is because there's little strings that connect the top of the wing to your body. So you can feel absolutely everything. So I just kind of got to understand that air is a bit messy, but you can read it in different ways. And so, yeah, overall, I'm now probably really quite tough when it comes to turbulence. I'm like, nah, that's fine. I can see it's because of that, and it'll be all right.
Very cool. All right, Miss Fellows class, if you guys have a question, there's a student waiting. Come on up. I think, oh yeah, Art. Okay, we've got a few classes that don't have mics working. So Miss Fellows class, we can't hear you guys. We can see you, we can't hear you. So little chat bar, bottom of your screen, a little oval with 3 dots. Type in your question there, and I'll pass it along to Sacha in just a second. Okay, guys. Sorry for the trouble. But yeah, let's go to Miss Ball's class. Do you guys have one? Come on up.
Do you guys have or no? Where did you get the flying motor thing?
Yeah.
Oh. Well, you can just buy them. So I looked at lots of different ones. So the one that I had for the last trip was made in Germany. I knew that the guys who'd made it had been on expeditions before, so I knew they'd tested them in quite tough conditions, and they were pretty indestructible. So slightly heavier, but quite indestructible. But yeah, I got them from a German manufacturer. Once they had the wheels on it, that was completely made by, there was an engineer in my crew, so I made sure, we knew that there was a good chance things would go wrong with the motors. So we made sure there was someone in the crew who could fix things from whatever he had available. And so, for example, when he built the 3-wheeled contraption with help from the Russians, they tried to bolt my paramotor onto it. What they didn't realize was that doesn't work because it needed to be able to flex a bit more. So they took all the bolts out and just tied it together with string. And so, believe it or not, it was just held together with string, but done really well. But yeah, it helps to have somebody who understands or play with different materials before to be able to fix problems when they come up.
Yeah, very cool. Actually, really briefly, you have a paramotor right behind you. And now I know we saw it in so many pictures, but there's a sense of how big it is compared to you and what a neat contraption. Yeah.
Yeah. So it doesn't normally come into the house as it is at the moment. I'm not sure how well you can see it.
It's great.
My head in, yeah. But you can see it's basically just a chair, a harness that you sit in. At the moment, it doesn't look much like a harness, but as soon as you start flying, as soon as you start running with the paraglider on, there's 2 arms at the side, and so as you run and the wing comes up, it pulls the arms up, and as the arms get pulled up, it pulls the seat up underneath you, so you kind of get scooped into it. So you start off with a backpack, and then as soon as you're in the air, it becomes a chair. It's magic. It's really clever.
Yeah, very cool. Miss Fellows, thank you so much for typing in questions. Feel free to type in too. I'm going to go through a whole other round in a minute. But Miss Cowgill's class, if you guys want to come up, go for it. Let's go ahead. So many questions. Perfect.
How many times did it take you guys to stop?
Like when they're flying, how many times does it take to actually land properly?
You know, how many times did it take to stop?
How many times do you have to stop every day or through the journey?
Oh, I see. So when you're flying, I could fly for about 3 hours maximum with the amount of fuel that I had. But do you remember me saying that what I was really trying to do, I was partly keeping an eye on the birds, but what I really had to do was stop and talk to people. So anywhere up in the Arctic where it was coldest, every time I saw a community of people, I would stop and land. So ideally, I would try and stop about every 2 hours because it was really cold. At some points, it was like minus 20 degrees. So my hands get really cold. And as soon as you start to feel your body getting cold, your brain doesn't work so well anymore either. So I tried to stop as soon as I started to feel cold. So ideally, yeah, about every 2 hours, I would try and stop. So I had a lot of stops on the way.
Miss Fellows class typed in a great question, which is do the oxygen levels that high up affect you at all? And whether going so fast, did it impact your breath? Or is there anything about breathing up there that was difficult?
No, it wasn't. Apart from the fact that it's cold, so it was really cold air. So if I took my visor off, it was quite cold. But you don't notice the loss of oxygen till quite high. If you're a swan, you might, because the swan needs the oxygen because it's doing lots of effort. When I'm flying the paramotor, I'm not doing that amount of effort. I'm sitting in my chair. Sometimes you can hear the motor doesn't run quite so well because the motor also needs oxygen, but I was generally okay.
Very cool. All right. Sacha, do you have time for another round of questions from all the classes? Excellent. Let's go back to Guelph then. Miss Gallant's class. If you guys have a second one, come on up. No? Okay, well, we'll come back, guys. If you have a question, come up and let me know. But we'll go to Miss Sullivan's group again. You guys have another one? Go for it, guys.
We're back. Can you hear us?
Yeah, you're great.
Okay. What sparked your interest in swans? Like, what made you want to, follow swans?
Yeah.
Okay. So my background is actually I'm a turtle and shark biologist is what I used to be. And the swans was actually because I realized quite a long time ago that a really important part of conservation is engaging people. And I thought that's actually what I'm quite good at and finding interesting ways to do that. And with the swans, it was there was about 25 scientists in a room together who were all really brilliant scientists. I really loved what they did. They had lots of really good information. They just needed to talk to more people. And so it wasn't that I was desperately in love with swans. That wasn't really what drove it. I was two things. One of them was really good people that I wanted to help. And the second thing was that graph you saw of the swans declining. So losing 1 in 4 birds every year, that's enough to be quite painful. And I thought that's a bird that needs help. And I think I can see a solution to it. So that's what it really was. It was really good people I wanted to help and a problem that was worth solving.
Excellent answer. Great question, guys. And by the way, Miss Sullivan's class, I'm really impressed with you guys. Usually older classes aren't so keen to come up, so I really appreciate some great questions. All right, Miss Gallant's class, looks like you have someone ready now, so come on up, go for it.
How many places did you pass?
Sure. How many what?
Places did you pass?
How many places did you pass? So you can interpret that as countries or whatever you'd like, Sacha.
So I probably stopped at probably three communities a day, something like that. 3 communities or wetlands a day, and I went through 11 different countries.
Wow, very cool.
So yeah, in total, my journey was 6,700 kilometers, something like that long.
Was there a country that really impacted you deeply? I mean, Russia, you were in for a long time, but is there anything that stands out?
Yeah, Russia, because it was so huge and so remote, and because there wasn't really the same sort of media there, people were very, very different. So there were, for example, when people talk about hunters, I had a picture in my head of the kind of people who were hunters, and then I was dropped in a small village, and I went to speak to the school, and all the kids start hunting when they're 9 years old. And so the hunters I was speaking to were 9 years old. So that was all very, very very, very impressive. And they're people who live with polar bears in the winter. Russia definitely has to be the most striking country of all of them.
Yeah, very cool. All right, Miss Ball's class, go for it, man.
How much did it cost to buy one of these things? The paramotor, and does it require a pilot's license or anything like that?
Yeah.
So I would say, how much does it cost? You're going to have to translate it into dollars. So they cost between, for the whole everything. The wing is quite expensive as well. So in the UK, you'd be paying somewhere between £6,000 and £9,000 for the whole lot. I guess it's a bit more than that in dollars, tiny bit more than that in dollars. Secondhand, it's obviously cheaper again. I'm not sure whether it needs a license or not. So in the UK, you can legally go out and buy it and you can legally fly it without it. But I would say that is the stupidest idea ever, because you really need training in it. When you've got the wing above you, it is quite a powerful thing when it's, certainly when the wind is blowing, there's a lot of strength in the wing. And if you don't know exactly what you're doing with that, and then you also put a propeller and a load of petrol on your back, you really, really need to know what you're doing and know when it's good to fly and not good to fly. And the other thing is, without learning it, you would struggle to understand air is broken up a bit like motorways are. So there's lots of motorways in the sky which are only for use by air traffic and things like that. So there's quite a lot to learn in order to be safe and a competent pilot. But it's the best thing I ever did.
Yeah, very cool. All right. And then last but not least, we'll wrap up with Miss Cowgill's class. You guys have a last question to wrap us up? Come on up.
Nice and loud, Trinity.
Was it hard to breathe when you were like really high in the sky, like above the clouds and like right under them?
Yeah.
It wasn't really hard to breathe. I tell you what was most difficult about being up there was, first of all, it feels very strange when you can't see the world. So you feel like you are not really connected to the planet anymore. That was mentally quite difficult. But it was so cold that I was getting icicles forming on the lines of my wing. And that was the thing that was most disconcerting. And the air was very cold, but it was fine. Breathing was okay.
So I lied. That wasn't the last question. We got one written in, which is a great question, which is there anything that kids can do to help swans?
Ooh, I suppose I would say the most important thing is to just try and be a set of eyes on the ground. So what we were looking for from this migration was to try and encourage people everywhere to know that we were actually interested, so that conservationists and people would be interested if you saw something that was going wrong. So I'd say, I'm not sure about swans particularly, but all birds, if you see things that you think are going wrong, then tell somebody. And there's quite often something that can be done about it. But just be interested and ask questions. And there's absolutely, people might not be interested, but if there's a real problem, then they will be interested. So just keep an eye out and be a voice for animals that can't speak whenever you can.
Outstanding. And then last but not least, we had classes obviously expressed that they wanted to ask more questions than we could possibly get to today. Is there a place where classes can get in touch, learn more about your work, ask more questions, anything like that? Online?
Yeah, are they allowed to use Facebook? I'm not sure. So the Conservation Without Borders has a Facebook page where we'll start talking about the next expedition. There is also a Conservation Without Borders website. It's a very long URL, unfortunately. But if you Google, if you want to know more about the flight of the Swans ship, you can find quite a lot on Google. There's different stories there. If you put in my name and Swans, things will come up around that. And we'll start talking more about the flight of the Osprey, which is the next trip. And I hope that we will find a way of working with you, Joe, to share it with a load more people.
Hey, anytime you want to do a session, we're happy to have you, and it'll be fantastic. Well, we look forward to that. We'll pass along all those resources to all our classes when we're done. And so what we do at the end of every session, boys and girls, if you guys could get ready to join me in saying a huge thank you to Sacha, I'm going to demute everyone's microphones. So Miss Cowgill, Miss Sullivan, Miss Gallant, and Miss Ball's class, if you guys could join me. Thank you so much, Sacha, for joining us today.
Ready?
Thank
Go. Thank you.
Bye.
So yeah, we hope to have you back soon, guys, for our class at Sacha. That was fantastic, and thank you so much for joining us once again. Have a wonderful rest of your day.